We were about to get started, and now we are rolling. We're live. Oh, you got to be kidding me. Spam, wouldn't you know? Where was I? Tonight's our last night. Tonight is our last night. 14 weeks is over already. As I said earlier, if you're taking it for credit, I will be sending that test out, the final out, probably tomorrow or Wednesday. When you get it, let me know that you got it, and then you can tell me what you're thinking of as far as the paper is concerned. The paper is only a 5-page paper, and I'm not looking for like scholarly. Well, it would be nice to have some scholarly resources behind it, but I'll give you the background behind the paper when you reach out to me. But if you're not taking it for credit, you are dismissed. Not right now, but you're free to go as soon as we're done tonight. I hope everything has been beneficial. I hope this study's been a good one for you. I hope we didn't just go back over the same stuff that you've been through with every other Genesis class. I hope there's some new things that kind of like expand your mind. That's what I'm hoping. But let's go ahead and begin. But before we do, of course, let's have a word of prayer before we begin. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for the day. We're thankful, Lord, for your watch care over us as we came here this evening. We pray, Lord, your blessings on us as we leave. Keep us safe as we travel. We're thankful for everyone who is in attendance for the class. We pray, Lord, that you bless us in our study of your word. We're thankful for your word and what it means to us. We ask that you bless those that we know of who are sick or having problems with their health. We ask, Lord, that you bless them with healing or recovery or whatever it may be. And we're thankful that we can come before you and ask these things. Most of all, Lord, we're thankful for your Son, Jesus. We're thankful for his sacrifice. And we're grateful for the promise that he delivered to us. It's in his name we pray. Amen. All right, here we go. We'll get to that in a minute. All right, we finished up with chapter 48 last week. I think we got through basically all of the chapter. I don't think we left anything unsaid unless anybody has any questions about what we talked about and want to go any further into that. Essentially, Jacob blesses Joseph's two sons, and we made mention of the fact that essentially Jacob adopts Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And what that means is they will take the place of Joseph. When they leave, Joseph's two sons will make up two of the full tribes when they leave Egypt after however many years they're going to be there. He says after Manasseh and Ephraim, if there are any children born after that, they belong to Joseph, and their inheritance is in Egypt. But these two tribes will go, and you'll find, and a lot of people want to talk about the idea of a half tribe. You've heard about the half tribe. I want to make sure that you understand this. Half tribe doesn't mean that there was a tribe and then half of it's no longer there. It means that half of the tribe is going to decide that they want to stay on the west side of the Jordan, and the other half of the tribe is going to be on the east side of the Jordan. That's when it talks about the idea of a half tribe versus a full tribe. I don't know how you would even ask, like having half a family or half a piece of pie. It's still a piece of pie. It's still a tribe. Doesn't matter how many people are in it. So you have half on one side, half on the other, and that's what it talks about. If you read a little bit further on, it'll talk about that. But anyway, that's what we get into. And he blesses them, and it's interesting that and it's sort of like following a pattern. We hear about this idea, the word primogenitor. This will be written up here in a little bit. Primogenitor. This is the idea of the firstborn, right? Firstborn has this special privilege that's allowed to the firstborn. But if you'll notice, almost everybody from Abraham forward, the firstborn hasn't received that, have they? Right? So in Abraham, you have Jacob and Esau, or Isaac and Ishmael, right? So Ishmael's the firstborn, but he doesn't receive that special gift for the firstborn. Then you have, with Isaac, you have Jacob and Esau. Well, Jacob essentially cheats Esau out of his firstborn, so he didn't receive his. And then we go a little bit further on. Who's the firstborn of Jacob? Reuben, right? Does Reuben receive the right of primogeniture? No, he does not. Who does? Joseph does. Okay? And then we see a little bit further even on that with Judah. Judah has, his firstborn son didn't receive it, and his secondborn son didn't receive it because both of them died at the hands of God. And then you have the thirdborn son, which is the one that received it through him, and so forth and so on and so forth and so on. Well, here we have it yet again. Joseph's sons, who was supposed to be the first one? Who's supposed to be the first, firstborn, or who was the firstborn who should have received it?
Manasseh.
All right. So he said Manasseh is supposed to receive it. Joseph actually takes his hand and moves it. Maybe he's thinking, okay, Dad's gotten a little old. He can't see and he doesn't know what's going on. He said, no. This is the firstborn. He says, I know, but, and he gives this blessing, but it's also a sense of a foretelling type of situation. All right. So he says, I know, son. I know my son. I know. Verse 19 of chapter 48. He also shall become a people. And he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he. And his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. And so he blessed both of them, but he blessed Ephraim better. Okay? So, let's go to chapter 49. Let's go to chapter 49. Now, has anybody ever been curious about the blessing of Jacob Jacob's blessings for his sons? I've always been curious about this because I've always had I've always wondered, is Jacob acting here as a prophet? Is he giving prophecy? These are the things that are going to happen. Is he speaking on behalf of God as the oracles of God, or is he looking at his family, seeing them, and having a good deal of discernment? Maybe the Lord is blessing him with a little bit of sight, the ability to see things that maybe even the brothers can't see. I don't know. But I've always been curious about this because he blesses them, and the way that he blesses them is very peculiar. The words that he uses, the imagery that he conjures up when he gives these blessings to his sons is very interesting. So let's look at this. In English Bible headings, if you got your Bibles open, chapter 40 or chapter 49, what's the heading? What does it say? Jacob's blessings, or the blessings of Jacob. All right. So look at 49 verse 1. What does 49 verse 1 say? Then Jacob calls his sons and says, "Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come." So then it all of a sudden becomes less of a blessing and rather a what?
Prophecy.
Yeah, it's prophecy. He's telling them what's going to occur. He's giving them some insight, both into themselves and to what's going to happen. Now, is he talking about specifically them themselves, the boys themselves? Maybe, but a lot of this we find being brought to come to pass a little bit further down in the future. Okay, so other people, other writers, other extra biblical writers have really termed the chapter more of a prophecy. Right? This is what will happen to you in the days to come. Now, a blessing implies what? And blessing implies what? When you bless someone, what does it typically represent?
Good things.
Yeah, it's a good thing. When God says, "I'm going to bless you," and when people bless God, it's always in the positive. It's always a good thing. It's always in the sense of, certainly in the Old Testament, with the idea of physical blessings, in the way that God blessed Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Nowadays we're blessed by God. We're not always blessed in the physical. A lot of times, most of the time, we're blessed in the spiritual. Certainly, we have all kinds of spiritual blessings through Jesus Christ. Right? And those blessings they're constantly coming. They're abundant. God doesn't skimp or He's not miserly when it comes to spiritual blessings. Okay? So blessing implies someone's favor. So when we read this, and at the beginning it says Jacob blesses his sons, we're thinking, okay, Jacob's going to tell them all of the good things. He's going to foretell the good things that are going to happen to each of these young men through their tribes. And here it doesn't say anything about when you leave Egypt. He just simply says, you are this, and this is what's going to happen, or you are this, or you are this, or you are this. So in the biblical world, when a parent would die without blessing his or her children, it was usually intentional. It was presumed to indicate that the children were in the parents' disfavor. Well, that's not so in this, because Jacob puts his disfavor on display when he talks to some of his boys, right? He tells them, this is what's going to happen, and this is why it's going to happen, and this is how you are in the abstract. Okay? And it talks about the tribes as if they were individuals. To me, Genesis 49 may be the most peculiar and interesting chapter in the entire book, and one of the most peculiar in the entire Bible, in my opinion. That's not everybody feels that way, but I do. And I've looked for research. There is not that much written in scholarly sources about Jacob's blessing. Lots having to do with Jacob's blessing of Joseph's 2 sons, but not much actually in the way of Jacob blessing his sons that he has through his 2 wives and his 2 concubines. There's just not a lot out there. So whatever I could find, I'm sitting there reading it, pouring through, and saying, okay, what are these people saying? What's the most current research that people have done? If they go back to the text, what are people saying about it? What are people saying about it? And truthfully, not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. But there were a couple. And this is some of the stuff that I'm going to bring to you. This is not something you go and you say, well, this matter is settled. Chuck said it on Monday night, and therefore the matter is settled and we don't have to go any further. Don't do that. I'm just presenting some stuff that I've read, and I thought it was very interesting. It gives a little bit more of an insight into what was going on with this family. Would you say that, by and large, Jacob's family was dysfunctional? I mean, I think that's probably being kind. His is like the poster child of dysfunctional. And I found it very interesting that one of the people that was writing about this said that, you can't look Jacob's family about as far removed from what many people talk about biblical family values. We like, the fundamentalists like to talk about biblical, fundamental family values found in Scripture. And I wanted to reply, it's like I've never heard anybody ever refer to Jacob's family as traditional family values. There are some values that are there, but you notice that oftentimes they disregard that value. They don't keep it. They don't keep it. Okay, so when we talk about family values, we're looking at the pattern that we find in New Testament Scripture that tells us how we're supposed to behave. We don't look to the Old Testament and say, well, we need to be more like them. No. In many ways, we need to be about as far removed from that example as we possibly can. We need to look at it as a cautionary tale, so to speak. All right? So, let's look at this for just a couple of moments. Now, the Hebrew word stem here, from bless, B-L-E-S-S, bless, is complicated. And the reason being that in 7 places in the Bible, and I've got more of these, this is just a couple of these, the word bless, the word stem, actually means to curse. Now, this is typical of Hebrew. Hebrew was not an incredibly descriptive language. You have words that mean basically, you can have one word that means basically the exact opposite, much in the same way that we see here. It could mean bless, or it could mean curse, and you've got the same word. So what do you have to look at? Context. All right? So, but if you look at the word context, if you said, Jacob curses his sons, is that a possibility? In some ways it could be very much a possibility. In some ways he may be blessing his sons, in some ways he may be cursing them, but not in the way that we typically think. Because when we think of bless, we mean to say good things about someone else. Cursing in this case is not necessarily saying something that's going to come true. It's making a point about them that if they don't change, if they don't make a difference in themselves, if they don't act towards a better ideal, then the things that are going to happen, the things that are said, are going to come true. All right? Say, for example, you've got a young man, and by and large, he may be a good young fella, but he just has problems. He has emotional outbursts. Maybe he's physically aggressive, so forth and so on. And you sit him down and you talk about it. You talk to him, and you say, look, you've got 2 choices here. You can either go this direction or you can go this direction. If you go this direction, listen, we will back you. We will do everything we can to help you along. We're going to love you regardless, but this is what we want you to do. This is what you need to do in order to be a productive member of society that's not in prison. But if you don't go this route, this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to wind up in jail or in prison, or you're going to wind up in a hospital, or you may wind up in the morgue. So these are your two options. Now, have you blessed him? Yes. Have you cursed him? Yes. Only in the sense that you tell them these are the things that are going to happen depending on which way you go. The route that you take from this point forward. Okay? You know, like I wrote it up here. It starts, when you bless someone out. Yeah.
Well, if you look at all the different ways he talked to these 12 people here.
Yeah.
Some of them were curses and some of them were blessings.
He made it very clear. Look, this is what
Reuben and
happened.
Simeon and Levi didn't get such a good analysis.
No. You know what he says? I mean, well, we're going to get into it in a second. What does he say to Reuben? He starts it out. And you think, oh, and then boom, he changes like on a dime. He says, "You are my might. You are the first fruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power." And then he turns and he says, "Unstable in water, you shall not have preeminence." So it's like this double. It's like it's like you ever heard of a compliment sandwich, right? You give them a good thing, and then you give them the thing they need to work on, then you give them another good thing. Jacob says the good thing, and then he finishes it up with all of the stuff that Reuben has absolutely let him down. That's the way he should have been is not the way that he is. Okay? So I think, and what I've read, I think it would probably be more accurate to call the chapter "The Blessings and Curses of Jacob." All right? Listen, that heading is made by a man. There's nothing scriptural about it or unscriptural. It's just simply that's a heading that they put at the top of the chapter. And we're free to look at it in a way that makes more sense to us rather than what we see, because we think of the blessings. There's three of these boys he doesn't give a blessing to in the way that we understand blessing. Okay? So it's almost as if, and I wrote here, it's almost as if Jacob is telling these guys, these boys, that he's had difficulty from the very beginning, from the point where he met Laban. It's been an uphill slog for this family almost the entire way, And now he's going to die in a land that's not his. He's going to die in Egypt. And I imagine at this point, to Jacob, he's probably saying, well, it's about as good as it could get. It's about as good as I deserve. Okay? You remember what he said to Pharaoh? What did he say to Pharaoh about, how long have you been around? How long have you lived? He says, what's that?
127 years.
Long time. not as long as his
Not long as, but he says, my days have been what? My days have been short and full of evil. So Jacob's looking at it and he's thinking to himself, I'm not going to be here forever. And what's going to happen to these young men? What kind of legacy are they going to leave for their tribes? I don't believe in generational curses in the sense that a lot of people want to believe in them. Okay? Everybody has the option and the ability to change who they are and what they do and their character. You can do that. And what he's saying is, look, I'm giving you ample warning, and I'm giving you something to reflect on in yourself. Now, whether they do it or not, at this point is up to them, because after this, Jacob is no more. Okay? So this is like his last chance to say something productive and constructive to his boys. All right?
I think he feels like he no longer has to have the filter on either.
That could be
like,
true.
You know what? I'm about to die. I'm just going to say what I want to say.
Yeah. I've been in several circumstances where a family, there's somebody about to die. You do that a lot as a preacher and as an elder. You're with families when that last moment occurs, and you will find people that are about to die, and this is their chance to finally get something off their chest, and they can, and they will. But a lot of times it's more of we're going to go peacefully. No sense in aggravating everybody, but there are people who will flat out, they will say what they need to say. And he needs to say these things, by the way. Because of who they are, they need to hear the things that Jacob is going to tell them. He doesn't need to leave without them knowing this is where you are, this is the road that you're heading down, and this is an opportunity to change it. Okay? So anyways, he said, essentially, right here, these stories are the legacy I will to you. This is what I'm giving to you. This is the legacy. Study them to understand where you have come from and where you are going. Okay? They need to hear it. All right? If you're not careful, by the way. Right? Kind of like that young man. If you're not careful, this is where you'll end up. If you are careful, this is where you'll end up. Are both of them helpful? Yeah. You know, we don't need to just hear the good. We need to hear what happens to us if we don't do what we're supposed to do. All right. So with that in mind, let's look at a couple of. All right. Here is where Reuben is essentially disinherited by his father. It doesn't mean he will not. His tribe will not have an inheritance, but he will no longer receive that right that comes to the firstborn son. That has been removed from him. In Genesis chapter 35:22, he went into his father's what? Not his wife, but his father's concubine. And essentially, because he did this, he did what the Mosaic law or the Hebrew law states. He uncovered his father. In other words, he was with a woman that his father had been with, and he had no right to do that. That was a sin against God. It was a sin against Jacob. And if you notice at the very beginning, it says everybody in all of Israel knew about it. Okay, so not only did he did it, but it became widely known. And we don't see anywhere where Jacob took him and wore him out, which would have been perfectly acceptable behavior. He didn't take him and he didn't discipline him in the way that we understand him to be disciplined. Now, just to say that he didn't, but we have what we have. All right. So he uncovered his father. He does, however, praise him for what? Not killing his brother. Remember, whose idea was it not to kill the brother? It was Reuben's idea. Hey, look, whatever we do, don't kill him. You know, don't take the boy's life. So they throw him into a pit. All right. So he's praised for refusing to kill Joseph when his brothers actually wanted to do just that. So I guess there's probably a good compliment sandwich. He talks about the good, who he was and what he should have been. Then he talks about the things that he did that were wrong, and then he kind of follows it up by, but you had the wise head and did not take Joseph's life. So maybe still had all the problems that went along with that, but his life wasn't taken, and you're responsible for that. All right. So that's verses 3 and 4. Now verses 5 through 7. Simeon and Levi. Look what he says. He yokes them together as brothers. Now we don't know what this means necessarily. We know the two thing that they did, that they went together, they put their heads together to come up with a plan, right? When the blessing, or when the massacre at Shechem, right? So he yokes them together. In their sin, they were yoked together. In their blessing, they're yoked together, or their cursing, or however you want to look at it. All right. It says tools of violence, or weapons. In my translation, it says weapons of violence are their swords. If you go a little bit deeper, you dig a little bit deeper, which is always a good thing to do. Probably the better translation of this is the tools of violence are their circumcision blades. In other words, because the idea here is, yes, did they kill the men of Shechem? Yes, they did. But what was the tool of violence that they used? They took something that was meant to be a tool that was used to bring a young Hebrew baby into that rite that signified who they were under the covenant. And what did they use it for? They used it for evil. They used it for death. They used it for murder. They massacred all of the men in this town. All right? So the slain man here would be Hamor, which in Hebrew also means he-ass, and the ox is Jacob. So if you look at that and you start plugging in these names, you see what Jacob is talking about here. This is the sin that linked you two, that yoked you two together, and that's how I'm going to talk to you. I want to talk to you as if you're yoked together. So the same action not only slew the Hivites, but it made the house of Jacob vulnerable. Remember, what does he say? What is this thing that you've done? You've made me a stench to the inhabitants of the land. So what did they have to do? They had to pack up and they had to leave, because these two sons have gone without any consultation. They've gone and massacred all of these men, and after getting them to engage in a behavior that truthfully wasn't going to do them any spiritual good anyway. They weren't sons of the covenant. But he asked them to do that so that they could come and they could kill them later on. 3 days when the pain and their recovery was at its worst. So it was just a reprehensible thing that they did, and Jacob calls them out on it. All right, he did then, and he does it again. Okay, so they're slain by a pair of brothers. They're yoked in their blessing. They're yoked in their sin. And look at verse 6. Verse 6 it says, "Let my soul not come into their counsel, O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and their willfulness they hamstrung oxen." Oxen, of course, being Jacob. And that's what he did. He said, you know, I don't. My name in this land is now ruined. It's mud because you two flew off the handle and did something you shouldn't have done. All right? But when he says, "Let not my soul come into their counsel," I kind of think of it this way. He says, "Look, I don't want my children to be murderers. I want you to listen up. I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want my kids to be this way. So listen up. Listen to what I'm telling you. This is your chance to change. You've seen, I'm laying bare everything that you've done. Now I want you to change. I want you to be better." He wants all these guys to be better. All right? So we've got Reuben, we've got Simeon, and we've got Levi. All right, Judah. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down before you. And then this is the first instance in verse 9. It says, "Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up." He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares rouse him? So 3 times, Judah is given these characteristics of a lion. As a lion cub, what's a lion cub? They're curious, they have youthful courage. You know, a lion cub will try to take on anything, and mom or dad has to come in and is like, "No, that's not for you, that's for me." That's not their job. But they have this youthful vigor and this youthful enthusiasm and courage. Then you have the lion. The lion is older, he's wiser, he knows what he can and cannot do, and he's not going to engage in something that he can't be successful at. All right, and then you got the lioness who is discerning. Think about who hunts. Is it the lioness or the lion? It's the lioness. So what do? When they sit there, they don't just go after any animal, do they? What animals do they go after? The ones they can catch. That's the answer. They go after the ones that they believe they can catch. That's why they don't go after a big bull elephant. They look at that thing and they say, "There's no way. We can't do that." So what do? They find a baby gazelle, right? They find the weak. They find the old. They find the immature. That's what they go after because that's what they can catch. They're not proud. Okay? So 3 times Judah is referred to in the form of some sort of a lion in the guise of a lion, right? All right. So let's look at this from the idea of the Messianic prophecy. That's where most people go to with this. I have another theory on this, and if you want to ask me about it afterwards, because we're not going to go into it. It's a little bit more of a detailed thing, and I don't want to take up a whole lot of time with it. And it's a little, I don't know who's going to be watching this. It has a little bit of an adult thing to it. Not bad, but it's all here. I just don't want to, okay. So the idea, if we look at this from the idea of a Messianic prophecy, we see it here, right? Because that's what we refer back to a lot. We go back to this a lot, this portion right here, right? He says, "The scepter shall" what? "Not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples." So if we look at this from the idea of a Messianic prophecy, it's kind of spelled out here, isn't it? It makes perfect sense, right? He says, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah." We know that the tribe of Judah had a man on the throne from the time of David, because Saul was a Benjaminite, from the time of David, who was from the tribe of Judah, all the way through until, was it not Jeconiah, but it's the one after Jeconiah. Not Zechariah. Now I'm trying to remember. The last one that was carried off into captivity, the tribe of Judah had a man on the throne. Who is of the tribe of Judah that will sit on the throne in the future? Jesus Christ. Okay, yeah. Throw it out there. Jesus Christ. All right. So his scepter, a ruler, the symbol of rulerhood, is not going to depart until the nations look to his progeny, right? It's not going to look until the tribute comes to him, until the nations look to this one who sits on the tribe of Judah. "And unto him shall be the obedience of the peoples." Now the idea of the people would mean simply the Jews, the Hebrew. But when it says peoples, that means all peoples everywhere. Everybody's going to look to this ruler that came from the tribe of Judah. All right? Judah received the greatest blessing of any of the brothers except for Joseph. All right, Jacob withholds that great big blessing until Joseph, the one who is replacing Reuben in that place of preeminence. Anybody have questions about what we find in here? 'Cause I'll be happy to. Yeah.
It's interesting because I'm reading this and I'm thinking, man, Jacob is just, well, to some of his sons, he's really being unforgiving. He's being harsh.
Yep.
He's not being like Joseph, his son, was forgiving his brothers. But you just made a really interesting point earlier by saying he did not take away the fact that they were still going to be part of, of Israel, that they were going to, but he's trying to teach them here. So it's interesting, just trying to step back and look at it. At first, I was thinking that I was going back to Genesis 28, and I'm thinking, man, Jacob, he's forgetting that God stood before him. He said, I'm your Lord God of Abraham and your father, and don't you remember? I'm going to be with you. But I think he does remember that, and I think he just wants to make sure that it carries on. But he needs to teach that.
Yeah.
But he's not taking away what God wants them to be.
You think about this. Jacob is, at this point, how old is he when he dies? You remember? 100 and... How long does Jacob live?
127, I think.
Well, he was 130 when he told Pharaoh he was
100.
a grumpy old man.
30 years.
110.
Yeah, when he comes into Egypt, I believe he lives another 15 years. I think he lives to 145. I believe that's what I said a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember now. It's been a while. So you think about this man. If this man, let's say this man is 145 years old, how old are these sons? These are old men. These are old men. These are not young. I think we often get that impression that Jacob is probably in his late 80s, and he's sitting on the edge of this bed, and all these young kids are gathered around him, and they're going to go out and fist fight over it. What did he say about you? Why did he say that about me? No, these are old men. These are old guys. So at this point, you would think, and I think we could agree on this, that these are guys that have had a lot of experience in the past. They've seen everything they've got is on full view at this point. When we look at this was something that Jacob would have done. He's not calling these guys individually in. This is something that the entire family would be gathered, the extended family would be gathered around, and they would hear this blessing / cursing that Jacob was going to do for his family. He's going to talk to them. And he's going to lay open all of this family. He's going to lay up everything that there is to say. This is his chance to make this final say-so about the life that they've lived and what his desire is for them. Okay, so we're thinking about these guys are probably, let's see, I'm trying not to go back and remember all this, but I'm trying to remember when Jacob got married the first time to Leah. I'm thinking he was close to 40. So, these young guys, these are not young guys anymore. These are men that have lived their lives, and they've got families of their own, extended families of their own. And the idea of coming in there and listening to your 145-year-old father, put your business out there, so to speak. I think at this point, they're listening to it as older men who know, and maybe they're sitting there thinking, Dad's right. Dad's right. Yes, sir.
Can we go back to what you said earlier at the beginning about this being a very dysfunctional family? Because I think there's something worth noting here.
Sure.
It's so true that they were old men.
Yes.
But when you consider what the father is telling them, they're guilty of.
Yes.
And these are old men who should have learned by now.
Yes.
And this is hanging over their head. So what that tells me is that when bad habits are developed and they stay with you and there's no repentance, then you get, I still don't understand completely how the house of Levites was, promoted after all of this, but the point that I'm making is that if we don't that was back then.
Mhm.
But in our day and age, if we're not careful with the habits we create, we could be developing some pretty bad habits. Like,
Sure.
it is mentioned in the book of Revelation, you guys do this and that, okay, there's that blessing, but if you don't change, this is what's gonna happen to you,
Yeah.
and spit you out.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, I think it does. I mean, like I said, this chapter, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting certainly in Genesis, certainly in the Old Testament, possibly in the Bible, because of what it allows us to think. And there's no clear-cut way of looking at any of this and saying, this is what this means. It's one of those things that the brothers that were standing there in front of Jacob as he comes by, and what typically would have happened is he was sitting on the edge of his bed, and all of the sons would come, and he would lay his hand on their head, and he would speak to them in a way that was particular and peculiar to them, said his piece, and they would have to accept it and move aside, let the next boy come. So as he's doing this, everybody is hearing. It's kind of like I'm trying to remember what movie I watched where it was simply, it's like, well, we need to clear the air. And one person just he says, okay, everybody, and they just laid out everything that happened. He said, okay, the air is cleared, and that's kind of what's happening here. We're going to go back over our history much in the same way that the writers of the scriptures have been doing. It's that God does not shy away from telling us what his children did wrong. I mean, it's abundant, it's clear. Unlike any of the writings of the other gods, our God, Jehovah, tells us what his people have done, good and bad, so that we can learn from it. So this is what he's doing. I'm giving you the good, I'm giving you the bad. I want you to learn from the things that I'm going to say. If you're careful, like he told Cain, right? He says, sin is what? Crouching at the door. What must you do? Master it. Okay? Or else it will devour you. And this is what Jacob's doing to his sons. Notice nothing that he's saying here is something that's unknown. He's telling them, he's looking at them and their proclivities, how they live their life, what their character is. He says, as a patriarch, what are you going to do? All right, how are you going to put this down the road? All right. So we go a little bit further on. Let's look at this. After Judah, which I said was the second of the greatest of the blessings, and then of course Joseph a little bit further on. It says Zebulun will dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. That's actually very particular, right? I mean, there's a lot of specifics in this. So Zebulun may be showing Zebulun as what his tribe is looking at a little bit further down the road as a roaming trader, maybe a commercial fisherman. And as we look at, well, we won't be looking at this, but if you want to look at this, you want to go to Joshua. As they come in, that's what you're going to find, where they go and what they end up doing. If you look at a map of how the tribes are laid out, some of it has to do with their physical location. Some of it just simply has to do with how they are, what kind of people they are. Issachar is a strong donkey crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good and that the land was pleasant. So he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. Issachar, and I'm not going to go into all of this, a whole lot of this, but Issachar was given a particular piece of property in the land of Canaan, and they decided that they wanted another piece of land that they felt was more befitting them, that they wanted a little bit better. It required less effort to till and to grow and to farm. But when they got in there, what they had to do was they had to destroy the inhabitants of the place where they were going to go. And I believe that God saw that and was displeased with it because before too long, Issachar, the tribe of Issachar, fell under the rule of foreign kings, nations, whatever it may be. They came in and they basically forced them into labor. And that's what happens to them. Okay? So when he talks about he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor, they did that because they weren't satisfied with a perfectly good piece of property that they were given, when those land allotments were handed out. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels so that his rider falls backward. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. Again, what in the world could he possibly be meaning in regards to Dan? What is he foretelling what they're going to end up doing? There are a lot of the scholars that I was reading, the scholarly research. Dan was well known as a tribe where you would have lawyers, people that would represent the people at court, represent the people in front of the king or whatever it may be. Using snares and cunning sounds like a lawyer, right? No offense, right? Everybody hates lawyers until you need one. And when you need one, you want him to be the most cutthroat lawyer in the land. I don't want to, I want this guy to win the case for me. So there, like I said, everybody hates him until you actually need one. Then I want the very best. Okay. So that's Dan. Raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. Gad is the tribe that was most well known for sending warriors when the call went out that we need warriors because we've been oppressed by this group of people. The tribe of Gad was the one that typically was very quick to send warriors to the aid of Israel or the individual tribes. You don't see too many, for a long time you don't see too much in the way of defending Israel. You find it people defending individual tribes. That's because it wasn't until Saul that the tribes began to coalesce as some sort of a cohesive nation. They were just groups of people, kind of like a confederacy of states, right? Until the United States came along, we were a confederacy of states. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. Again, is that something that this entire tribe is going to be well known for this? If you want to get a little deeper into it, I encourage you to get a little deeper into it. There's some stuff behind the names, but a lot of it is contradictory. So again, I don't want to throw something out there if I can't throw everything out there. I don't want you to think one thing versus over another. But the common thought was that Asher is going to, as Gad would fight, Asher was the tribe that would produce the food to feed Gad as he fights. The tribe, by the way. Okay, Naphtali. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. As I wrote up here, Naphtali's blessing is difficult in the original Hebrew. I can't read Hebrew, so a lot of that was written. I'm just looking at it, and it's just, I have no idea what it's saying. And there's no good program that would translate biblical Hebrew for me. So it's sort of I'm having to find like the Cliff's Notes behind all of this. The idea of beautiful could mean graceful. The idea here is that it may be that he is prone to elegant speech, diplomatic, right, in his interactions. Could be that when one tribe was having a problem with another tribe, they may call on someone from the tribe of Naphtali because of their ability to interact with both and act as like ambassadors between the two, diplomatic, so to speak. And you're looking at it going, doesn't none of this make sense? Good, yeah. Join the club. Join the club. This was just really a fascinating chapter. All right, but then we get into verse 22. This is the big blessing. You notice that he goes from oldest to youngest. All right, so here's Joseph. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. What are we thinking of here? He is fruitful and overruns any artificial barrier. He didn't let being in a foreign land keep him from worshiping his God and being faithful to his God and becoming successful, right? Verse 23 and 24, when tempted, he was unmoved and did not sin. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely. Well, we don't see that literally anywhere in the narrative, do we? Where do we find Joseph shot at by archers? We just don't find it in there. So what were the archers that were firing at him? What was the idea here that he was set upon by archers who were shooting at him and harassing him severely?
His brothers.
Could it be his brothers that there was a constant friction going on between them? Absolutely. What else? Potiphar's wife, right? Satan is at hand in both of those, right? Satan is tempting his brothers to persecute him and to harass him. He's also well at work with Potiphar's wife, who is constantly, it's like daily. This young man is being tempted daily. Now, having been a young man myself, 17 years old, can you imagine that? There's this grown woman who's taken an interest in you, and if it weren't for your desire to not sin against your God and not sin against your master, then what would keep you from giving into the temptation? Not much. Not as a 17-year-old boy. When you get a little older, you have a little bit more sense, most of the time, not always. But, this is what's happening. Satan is firing his fiery darts at Joseph constantly. He's bitterly being attacked. But his bow remained unmoved. In other words, what? He was steadfast. He stood tall, he stood strong, he did not give in to the temptation. He didn't allow this to destroy him. His arms were made agile. And look what it says. Jacob brings this out. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. So this is sort of like a personal, the idea of this God that I serve is personal to me. He's not mine. I don't own him, but he's personal to me. I know a lot of people talk about, I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And I think we do have personal relationships with Jesus Christ. But it doesn't mean that Jesus is yours and yours alone. I have a personal relationship with Jesus, but that doesn't mean he's mine. He belongs to everyone that will obey. Okay? I think we get into that a little bit too much, but Jacob says, this is my God. This is my God. This is the God that appeared to me in the wilderness. He spoke to me. He told me all of the things that he's going to do. All right? And he says, his arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Stone of Israel. What's a stone? It's going to be a platform from which everything else is going to be built. By the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches underneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb, blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents. In other words, even what my father passed down to me, I'm giving you more even than that. Up to the bounties of the everlasting hills may they be on the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. All right, so a big, long blessing on Joseph. It's interesting that Jacob still feels the desire and the need to bless Joseph, because who's Joseph? Now, at this point, who's Joseph? He's what?
Big man in Egypt.
He's the second in command in Egypt. He doesn't need anything that his father is going to give him. He is well blessed. But Jacob wants to remember that the blessings are coming from God, not from Pharaoh. The important things are coming from God and not from Pharaoh. Which is always good. Remember from the very beginning, Abraham says, I don't want a thing because I don't want anybody to say that you made me wealthy. My blessings come from God. Isaac said the same thing. Jacob saying the same thing. And to remember, Joseph, everything that you've got, remember, it all comes from God. God is the fount of the blessings, not Pharaoh. And last but not least, and then we'll stop for our break, Benjamin is, and look at this, and this is kind of interesting, and again, doing a little bit of research looking at this, you think about this because what do we, in our minds, what do we typically think of when we think of Benjamin in relation to Jacob? Who was Benjamin to Jacob? Yes, he was the last son, but what else? And what was he to him? If we look at the narrative. You got it, come on, I know you got it.
His last son.
He was his last son, but then what did that make him? According to the story, according to his brothers, what does that make him?
The youngest son.
He was the baby boy, right? He was the most loved. He was the one that according to the brothers, that in Joseph's absence, Benjamin became the most favored. He was his baby boy, and he didn't want anything to happen to him. But if we look at this, why do we think this? It's simply because the brothers said that. Now we look at it and we say, well, Jacob doesn't want Benjamin to go to Egypt with him because if he does, it says he'll bring my gray hairs down into Sheol. In other words, I'll go to my grave mourning the loss of one. But why do we seem to think that means that Benjamin is his favorite? We don't see that. We don't see that. It doesn't say that. We assume that because Joseph was the favorite. Now Benjamin comes from Rachel as well, and therefore Benjamin's going to be the favorite. But we don't find that in the Scriptures. We assume it because of what we've seen with Joseph. But think about it, would this not be reasonable for Jacob not to want his youngest boy to go down there because he might die? Absolutely. Absolutely. And he was the last one, he was the last tangible connection with his Rachel, which was the love of his life. But that's what we find. So look at this, you think, okay, he's got a big one in store for Benjamin. He's about to do this. Look what he says. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil. Wow. Now, I want you to think about this. If you go to Judges chapter 19, it's the tribe of Benjamin that perpetuates this terrible act on the man's concubine. Think about what happens. In the morning, the woman dies, but at night, you had all of these men that came and sexually assaulted her. Okay, so it's this terrible thing. It was well known throughout the entire nation of Israel. So the tribe, basically, the tribe of Benjamin was almost destroyed by their actions because people said, we've got to avenge this. This cannot stand. And they all came against Benjamin. They were about to destroy the tribe. They were going to utterly destroy it. So I'm thinking that may be the case, what we're talking about here. All right, let's stop. And then we'll pick back up 5 minutes after 7. We'll pick back up and finish up. Let's go ahead and finish up. And then maybe if we get out here a little early, we'll get out here a little early. All right, so Jacob has issued these proclamations. He's kind of dug a little into the family. He's talked to these young men, these 100-year-old men, and younger. But the family history is kind of on display here, and this is the last thing that he's going to say to his family. Now, I want to make sure that we read this, and nowhere do we find in here that it says that Jacob didn't love his sons, that he wished ill on them, that he was going to. This is his chance to get his revenge for perpetrating such an awful, awful deception for all of those years. We were talking about that at the break. You think about when they went back and talked to Jacob, and you notice that he didn't say, "Hey, we think your son's been torn apart by wild beasts." They just present this robe with blood on it and say, "Isn't this your son's?" And he says, "My son must have been torn apart by wild beasts, and now he's no longer, and he's sad and everything." And nowhere do we see they don't try to comfort him. They don't try to talk him out of that misconception, and they simply allow him to wallow in misery for years and years and years and years and years. And that's a generational thing. You think about that. What did they tell the kids? What did they tell their kids? Did they perpetrate the ruse with their children and their children's children? Uncle Joseph. Well, we had a younger brother, but he was torn apart by a wild beast. Do they perpetuate that? How does that work? So this is just like we said. It's dysfunction, and a dysfunctional family can still be a loving family, and they can still want what's best. But the things that they do to one another, the idea of generational trauma, I think this is where people get it from. It's like, how long has this been going on? Yes, sir.
One last thing about this, I find it so sad that Jacob deceived his father.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously we don't believe in karma.
No.
But this must have stayed pretty, it must be like a heartburn for him.
Yeah.
To realize that his son's deceived him all these years.
Yeah.
So I'm sure he didn't hate him, but I think that he harbored some kind of maybe guilt as well as maybe being really perturbed that they deceived him and really hurt him that way.
Yeah, this is just a family that was fraught with.
Now we're not told that, but
I think it's reasonable. I mean, we're looking at human beings here. These are not super people, right? They're human beings. They have the emotions, they have anger, they have bitterness, they have hatred, they have love, they have support, they have all of these things. When his brothers came near and he told them who he was, he fell on there and they wept. There was a restoration of sorts at that time. Now we're going to see here in just a couple moments. They still have some reservations about this restoration between the relationships. But again, they're getting older and they're getting a little bit wiser. But they still have a little bit of. They're still kind of we want to hedge our bets a little bit here. I think we're going to be okay, but when we talk to Joseph after Dad's gone, we need to just kind of make sure because he holds all the cards. There's nothing to prevent him. There's no one standing in his way anymore. See, as Joseph looked at his father Jacob, if Jacob had said, I don't want you to do this, Jacob would have been, as an obedient son, would not have done it. But now that last thing is removed. So now if Joseph wants to get revenge, there's nothing to prevent him. All of the wives and the concubines are out of the way. So he is able to do pretty much whatever he wants to do if he does have that mindset. Okay. So real quick, just go back to Benjamin. He's understood to be a beloved son, but he lacks any real blessing. It's just more of an exploration of his character, so to speak. Let's go to the last part of 49. So all of these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father said to them as he blessed them, blessing each with. And look what it says. I think this kind of goes into the idea of is it a blessing or is it a curse or what is it? He says the blessing suitable to him. This is not wishful thinking on Joseph's part. This is a exposition, let's just say. All right. So he gives them this blessing that is suitable to the person, that fits the person. Then he commands them. All right. His last thing, his last will and testament, so to speak. He commands them. He says, "I am to be gathered to my people." In other words, this is not my home. My family that's gone on before me is in another place. That's where I want to be. I don't want you to bury me here. So, bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephraim the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field at Machpelah, to the east of Mamre in the land of Canaan. And it sounds like why is he saying all of this in the way that he does? There's no mistaking what exactly he wants them to do and where this is. All right, he's laying it all bare for them, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephraim the Hittite to possess as a burying place. So we've got Abraham, we've got Sarah, we've got Isaac, we've got Rebekah, we're going to have Jacob, and we'll have Leah is buried there. Rachel is the one that's not buried there. She's buried, I think, further north and to the west, I believe, northwest. So she's the only one that's not there. So there they buried Abraham and Sarah's wife. They buried Isaac and Rebekah's wife. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it were bought from the Hittites. So he gives them this final exposition. This is what you're going to do. This is where we're going to go. There it is. It says, when he finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, blessing each of his sons, laying his hands on their head, blessing them. Then when it was all over, he laid back. He pulled his feet up in the bed. They covered him over. And, whatever, short period of time, who knows? Could have been a couple hours, could have been a couple of days. But he drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. And that's an interesting phrase, right? He breathed his last. We understand that. He took his last breath. Everybody does eventually, take their last breath. But it says he was gathered to his people. What does that mean? This is one of those things that people use to talk about the idea of there's something beyond this life. There's someplace other than here. The understanding of an afterlife, and we've mentioned this before, was a concept that was very much shrouded in mystery for God's people for many, many, many years. It wasn't explained. And to be truthful, let's be honest, even for the Christian, there's a lot of questions going on about the afterlife, aren't there? We know there is one, and we have a very tenuous understanding and grasp on what it is, but we don't know. We know we're spirits, but are we spirits living in a spiritual world, an immaterial world? But there's still the ability to experience and to have sensory understandings. I'm having a hard time explaining it because it's a hard thing to understand. We don't really understand. And if you think that we have a hard time understanding it, these folks had an even more difficult time because we're not really given anything in the scriptures to understand. They're not said, oh, by the way, when you die, this is going to happen and this is going to happen and this is going to happen. We don't see anywhere in the scriptures where they're told this. But But Jacob here has at least a basic understanding. He was gathered to, I'm sorry, not Jacob. Moses has a basic understanding. He's the one that wrote the book. Moses has a slight understanding about what's going on because he understands that Jacob, when he breathed his last, there's a part of him, there's a portion of him. We understand, of course, the idea of the soul. His soul goes to be with the souls of the people that died before him, that preceded him into death. And he was gathered to them, which kind of gives you the understanding that they knew who he was and they welcomed him into that fellowship. But where they are, they don't understand the idea of a waiting place or paradise and punishment. They don't understand all of that. But this is kind of a very interesting when it says he was gathered to his people. And I think people overlook that very quickly because they're ready to get on to the next chapter. But I think this is really neat. Moses is saying, hey, when he died, he went to be with the people that died before him. Abraham and Sarah and his mom and his dad. That's where he goes to be with them. All right? Yes, sir.
Why wasn't Rachel buried there?
I think she died alone. I think it was too far to take her back for burial. I'm trying to remember exactly the circumstances surrounding it. But she died. She died in childbirth, and they were a distance away from where they would be burying her. But as far as exactly why they didn't make that trip back there, there must have been just some sort of exigent circumstances that we're not given to know why they didn't make the trip back. It's interesting because they make a big trip to take Jacob back to be buried there. So.
Well, and he also loved Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting that he also chose not to be buried with her.
Yeah. I think it's because that's an ancestral thing. That's where his grandfather purchased.
Yeah.
It was bought for that particular purpose.
Yeah.
And he may have not wanted to bury Rachel where he buried her, but that was just the circumstances demanded it at the time. So Jacob is dead. Jacob is dead. All right, so let's go to the last chapter, chapter 50. All right. Starting at the very beginning, it says, "Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him." Doesn't mean that the other brothers didn't, but the narrative here picks up what Joseph is going to do immediately after this. So it's showing what Joseph is doing before he immediately does this thing, okay? So there's no doubt that the other brothers probably came, paid their respects, kissed their father's head, but this is talking about Joseph. So Joseph falls on his father's face, weeps over him and kisses him. He loves his father. And probably those last few years of Jacob's life are probably the most happy he's been in a number of years. With all the stuff that's going on, everything that he's had to do, these were probably some of the happiest. Didn't have to worry about it anymore. Before, remember, he was the one responsible for feeding and taking care of all of these people in his household. And since they've been living in Egypt, Joseph's been able to take care of all that. And that's kind of a load off somebody's mind. I love my daughters, but I can't wait until they get married and some man comes and takes them and takes care of them. And I sign off and say, she's yours now. You protect her, you feed her, you clothe her, you do all of these things. I'm happy to give that up. I'm still going to love her. But, that idea that somebody else loves your child as much as you do and wants to take care of him. So here's where Joseph has been doing this. I mean, he has the ability and he has the power, and this is what he's been doing. So he commands his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. Now, the idea of embalming in Egypt is exactly what you think. They are going to mummify Jacob. All right? They're going to mummify him. This was not something that was employed in Canaan. They would typically wrap them. But the idea of doing all of the stuff that went into the embalming, because it was an expensive, lengthy process. All right? All of the organs, I watched a neat little video. If you ever want to watch a neat little video, I watched a neat little video on mummification and what they did. It was tedious. It took a long period of time to do because each process, there was something that was done, and then they would have to wait, and then they would do another part of the process, and then they would do it again. So basically, all of the organs, every one of the organs was removed. They were eviscerated. Everything was taken out that would putrefy, that would not embalm well. And then, of course, they took out the brain. And they took out the brain. They had this little hook, and they went up through the nostril, and they would pick out little pieces of the brain. They would eventually pull it all out. The only thing they left in there, which was interesting, and this was peculiar, of course, to the Egyptians, they left the heart. because of a superstitious belief in the idea of in regarding the heart. Anyway, they left the heart in there. So then what they would do is they would take the body and they would pack it inside and out with a special type of salt, nacre, N-A-C-R-E, I believe, nacre. Anyway, they treat it with the salt that removes almost all of the moisture, essentially turning him into Jacob jerky. All right, this is what he is. All right, he is shriveled, and there's almost no moisture left in that body. No. All right. Then what they would do is they would take it and they would wrap it. They would wrap it with fine Egyptian linen, and then they would smooth it out with rosin, and then they would wrap it again, and then they would coat it with rosin, and they would do this over and over and over and over again, multiple times, all the way around the body. And then again, they would put him in not a kiln, but it would basically be a hot, dry room where he would continue. The rosin would dry, the bandages would constrict. So basically, Jacob is just this wrapped up little mummy. I mean, and I'd say that you would lose something like 70% of your body weight when all of it's all said and done. So, if you're looking for a weight loss idea, there we go. But anyway, mummification reserved for the nobility and the wealthy. So this shows Jacob's position, even not just in his own family, but in the land of Egypt. Jacob was a well-regarded man because he's Joseph's dad. I remember for the longest time when we went to church before I got grown and got married and moved out, everywhere we would go, they say, there's Charlie's son, that's Charlie's son, that's Charlie's son, that's Charlie's son. Now, when we move and mom and dad come with us, they say, that's Chuck's dad, that's Chuck's dad, that's Chuck's dad. Well, that's essentially what's going on. That's Joseph's dad. Oh, okay, yes, sir. A lot of deference shown to a man who produced such a great person as Joseph. And he was a great man anyway, but because of what he did, right, he gave birth to this son that was going to save the known world at that time. All right? Kind of familiar, right? So, but anyway, this shows the kind of honor that Jacob was shown because it was due him. It also goes to show that even though Jacob sinned, Jacob erred, Jacob made mistakes, Jacob did all of these kind of things, at the end of the day, what did he try to do? He tried to serve God. He tried to observe God's rules. He tried to observe God's laws and conduct. He tried to instill those, whether they were well received in his sons or not, which we see not always well received. This is what he attempted to do, I think, maybe to the best of his ability. But we see where his son, which is kind of interesting, his son actually, from what we see in the narrative, actually made a better show of it than even Jacob did. All right? Joseph was actually a better man in this regard than even his father was, which is unusual. Usually they say the older is greater than the younger, but in this case, the younger actually, his obedience to God was actually greater even than his father's. All right. Okay. Cut off on me, sorry. So, 40 days were required for it, for that is how many are required for embalming. So for 40 days they put this man's body through the ringer, trying to get it prepared for a burial that is appropriate for such a man. And then the Egyptians wept for him for 70 days. Now, I could not find whether the 70 days included the 40 days of embalming, which would have made more sense. They started mourning for him when he died, and that lasted for 70 days, and for 40 days of that, they were embalming him. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But look at both of those, 40 and 70. Both of those numbers are very much used in Scripture to note certain things. 40 is a day of transformation, right? Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days to be tempted, to fast, and then he was tempted. Jesus was transformed when he came up out of that wilderness. In 40 days and 40 nights, the world was transformed from this beautiful, lush paradise into a land that was it was like a war zone after the floods had come. Tons of examples. All right. So when the days of weeping for him were past, so there was an appropriate amount of time. It was set. So for 70 days we're going to mourn. That would be the appropriate amount of time for someone of his stature. For example, the Pharaoh, it would probably be 6 or 7 months. There would just be this outpouring. But 70 days is pretty good. I know most people, they die and 3 days later there's a funeral, and then after the last casserole's eaten, it's like, who was that again? I don't know who they were, you know. So 70 days is a long time to mourn for someone, and that's what they do. So they weep for him, the days of weeping are past. Joseph speaks to the household of Pharaoh, and he makes a request. It's interesting that he makes this request. All right? So he asks them, he asked Pharaoh, if I have found favor in your eyes. Now remember, when they're doing this, it's a very diplomatic speech. This is how this was done. It was very diplomatic. You're going to a man that has power of life and death. So you go to him and you're very gracious in what you say. It's always you're supplicating yourself. If I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the ears of Pharaoh. He's talking to his people that would be the barrier in between him and them. My father made me swear, saying, I am about to die. In my tomb that I hewed out for myself in the land of Canaan, there shall you bury me. Now, therefore, please let me go up and bury my father, then I will return. All right? So he has to ask this permission. Why would he have to ask permission? Think about it. Joseph's second in command in the nation. Why would he have to ask permission from Pharaoh to take his father to be buried? Number one, it would be an appropriate thing to do, right? Like if my father were to die, I would have the right to go and bury my father. But it would be an appropriate thing to ask my employer, hey, listen, I need a couple of days to go do this thing that I need to do. What are the odds that they would tell me no? Almost zero odds that they would say no. But it's the appropriate thing to do. Number two, Joseph is a very important man. And he says, I will return. So in other words, he's assuring Pharaoh, I'm not leaving to leave. I'm not leaving and not coming back. I'm not going to go bury him and then, hey, I don't need Egypt anymore. I'm going to head out of here. I'm going to go do something else. He makes it clear, look, I know I'm an important person here. I know that you need me to come back. I know that I know stuff about this nation that if a foreign nation or a foreign actor were to take me away, I'd be able to give them all kinds of stuff about it. I don't want to do that. I will be back. Don't think that I'm deserting you. All right? So Pharaoh answers and he says, go up and bury your father as he made you swear. About what we would figure. This Pharaoh, anyway, seems to be a very gracious, a very understanding Pharaoh. I think we think of Pharaoh in the time of Moses, that all the pharaohs were these wicked, evil men that sought to destroy and to flout God. And that's not the case with this Pharaoh. This is a pretty reasonable fellow. So it's okay, go bury your father. So Joseph goes up to bury his father. Look what he says. He says, with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all of the elders of the land of Egypt. Now, who are the elders of the land of Egypt? All the elders of the land of Egypt. Who would these people be? All the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of Pharaoh's household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. So, who's going with Jacob to take his father, or who's going with Joseph to take his father to be buried?
The whole tribe.
But all of the important people, all of the VIPs of Egypt, everybody that's anybody is going to want to be a part of this procession to take Jacob up to the land in Mount Pelah and bury him, as well as all the household of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's household. So you can imagine the caravan of people that are going to be. This is not something that's going to. This is not, hey, let's get in the car and drive real quick. This is something that's going to take a long time to do. They're driving. They're going a long way, and this is something that's going to take a long time. This is a slow funeral procession, all right? Has anybody ever ridden in a funeral procession? I imagine almost everybody has at some point or another. At one point, I was working for a funeral home in the context of being a chaplain for them when I was preaching, and there was something really cool about being. There would be the police escort, and then you would have the hearse, and then the preacher gets to go right behind the hearse. So I'd be in my car and I'd just be like, everybody stop. That's right. And we just tool on through stop signs and red lights and everything like that. And it's just sort of like, I'm enjoying this a little bit because everybody's, they see, or people would pull over to the side of the road. I think that's still a thing for as long as we could keep it going. People pull off the side of the road. We would pull up alongside road crews, and road crews, they'd take their hard hats off and they'd put their hard hats over their hearts. And people just showed a lot of respect and deference to a funeral procession. Well, you can imagine, as small as the ones that we've been, or the biggest the ones we've been in, this one makes them all look pathetic. We're talking about maybe hundreds of people all taking this man, how important this guy was. They're taking him up to this place to be buried. All right? But look what he says, only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the land of Goshen. So almost everybody associated with this man is going up in this funeral procession. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen. It was a very great company. I think that's selling it short. It was a huge company. They come to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, and they lamented there with a very great and grievous lamentation, and he made mourning for his father 7 days. This idea of this mourning, this was something, it was certainly an outpouring of emotions, but part of it was there was a pattern. There was a procedure to doing this kind of thing. There were people who were designated. These are people who were they were professional mourners, so to speak, in the land of Egypt. So they while the rest of the family sat and kind of fellowship, you had people that was essentially their job, to weep and to wail, to throw dust in the air, to tear their clothes. When it says a great lamentation, that's what's going on. So you see all these videos where the people, and they're beating they're beating themselves, and they're doing this and throwing dust in the air. This is the kind of thing that's going on. All right, so they're making a big deal out of this man. So they made a mourning for him 7 days, and when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, and this is kind of important, when the Canaanites saw the mourning on the threshing floor of Atad, they said, "This is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians." And you notice that they don't say it's a grievous mourning by the Hebrews, they say it's by the Egyptians. So if Egypt, at this point, one of those powerful nations in the world, and certainly in that particular area, if Egypt was mourning over this person like this fellow was a very, very, very important person. They could have, if they weren't in that area, they could just easily thought that the Pharaoh himself had died. Okay, this is how important it was. Thus his sons, verse 12, thus his sons did for him as he had commanded them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan. They buried him in the cave of the field at Machpelah, to the east of Mamre. After he had buried his father, Joseph returns to Egypt with his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury him. So they all go up there, they mourn for 7 days, then they go and bury him, and then they head back to Egypt, as Joseph had said he's going to do. So, this is one last weird thing with this family. Out of all the weird things they've done, there's one more weird thing that they're going to do. Verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." Have you ever heard of projection? Do you think maybe this is projection on their part? I wonder if the shoe was on the other foot, would they have done this to Joseph?
It's definitely a guilty country.
They're certainly speaking from a place of deep guilt. Deep guilt. Now, it's entirely possible. I'm not saying I don't want to cast aspersions on these guys. It's entirely possible that they were genuinely repentant of the things that they had done. I think they probably are. But they still have this nagging feeling, that little itch in the back of their mind, thinking, what we did was really, really bad. And I don't know, he says he's forgiven us, but what if he hasn't? What if he hasn't? He's got us down here where if he wanted to, we could be killed and our children sold into slavery, our cattle could be confiscated, and what's going to happen? There's no one to stand between us and, Dad's gone. What's going to happen? So what do? Yes?
One thing that's interesting about this is that their guilt went on for years and years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, I just think that it's such a great thing to come to terms that this is what the blood of Jesus covered.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this guilt, it can be so heavy, and it's a yoke around a person's neck.
Yes.
What sin does. And they realize that.
Yeah.
And they have no idea of what is to come later on. But we can benefit because we see the afterward, the
Yeah.
after effects.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good thing to focus on, that we don't have to carry that guilt.
Yeah, we need to put guilt down. Once it's been forgiven, we need to let it go. But again, you know, we are human, and in every dumb, I'll say it, every dumb way we are sometimes, we're human. And we think we've got it taken care of, and I know people, and you probably do too, who have lived a particular lifestyle, and they've come out of that lifestyle, they've asked for forgiveness, God's given them forgiveness, and everything is, but they still have this sense of, I don't really deserve the forgiveness that I've gotten, therefore I haven't really gotten the forgiveness that I'm supposed to get. Jim, what'd you have?
Yeah, I think especially also in marriages, you know, there can be years
Oh, sure.
and where things happen,
Yeah.
and forgiveness was received, but you know, we're human, you know,
Yeah.
and we fall weak, we get, you know, and things happen, and we doubt, and I just think what probably happened with them is I think they too were very much mournful and repentant to Joseph about what they did to him.
Yeah.
But I think when Jacob brought back all that stuff in front of Joseph, and the last thing that happened was praising Joseph,
Mm-hmm.
and then you hear all this stuff about his brothers, it was like, okay, he's bringing up all this stuff again, I hope.
Yeah.
To me, I could see why they would probably think. I mean, they're just human.
Yeah, they're human and fallible and foolish. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
I think there's something else going on here, and it's maybe not quite as pure. It's self-preservation. And these guys know, hey, if the shoe was on the other foot, maybe we wouldn't be as
Yeah.
forgiving. So
I'm going to
maybe
be
we need
pragmatic, right?
Maybe we need to do something, and they're going to go on to say something that we don't actually hear Jacob say.
Now, I think you know, as you know what the scripture says, you need to be harmless as doves and wise as serpents. And I think this is the idea of being, you know, sometimes wisdom doesn't always entail doing something good. Wisdom entails concept, the idea of self-preservation. And sometimes self-preservation takes over. It's like, I just don't, you know, look, we've got it great here. We don't want Joseph all of a sudden to get a wild hair about him and say, you know what? You know, now that Dad's gone, now that I think about it. But you know what's interesting? What did Esau say? He said, when the days of my father are gone, when the days of mourning my father are past, I'm going to what? I'm going to kill Jacob. So this is not out of the realm of human nature to think that even years and years and years, generational things going on here, even now they're thinking, you know what? We're just better safe than sorry. So what we're going to do, look at what they're going to do. They're just simply enacting a promise from Joseph that he won't kill them, that he won't remove them, cast them out, or do whatever. And that's all it is. They're not looking for anything extra. They're just simply saying, don't do anything foolhardy here, brother. You know, we're all together, right? And by the way, your dad said. So they're worried that Joseph still bears a grudge. This is all it is. We don't read anything else in this other than they're worried that Joseph is still bearing a grudge against them. So, as I said up here, they attempt to nip it in the bud by giving this false report to Joseph. And look what he says. It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died. Now, nowhere do we read this command that Jacob gave. Now, it's not to say that he didn't give the command, but there's nowhere that we read that he gives this command. All right? And by the way, it would likely be, if the command came out, he wouldn't say, oh, by the way, tell your brothers that I don't want to. No, who would he go to? He'd go to Joseph. Hey, by the way, Joseph, I know that it's maybe that you're still upset, but what I want you to do is promise me that you will not do to your brothers, that you will do unto them as you would have done unto you. That's who he would have gone to. Jacob seems like a pretty pragmatic dude. So he likely would have gone to Joseph instead of saying, oh yeah, by the way, tell your brothers, I'm about to die, and before I die, tell him that, no. He would have said something to Joseph while he was standing there in front of him. You know, in full view of everybody, this is what I want you to do. I'm blessing you, and then I want you to make this promise. So odds are that this was never said. It's not impossible, but it's highly improbable that Jacob said anything like this. But he said, they sent a message to us saying, your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin because they did evil to you. And now, please forgive the transgressions of the servant of the God of your father. So now they're invoking their father and they're invoking God in this. So that's like a double whammy. Oh, by the way, it's like a double dog dare. You know, it's like I'm going to invoke God and I'm going to invoke the Father. Not just say, listen, we're sorry for what we've done. And I hope that you still feel that forgiveness in your heart. No, we want to make sure that Dad's brought into it and that his God is brought into it, and therefore in full view of everybody that you promise that you're not going to do anything to us. But look at what he says. And you know, I'm just curious. It's a very curious transaction between these guys. How old do you have to get before you have a little bit of common sense? Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Joseph, I genuinely believe that he's weeping because he feels badly that these guys still think this. He's laid it down. He laid it down years before. He probably laid it down even before he saw his brothers again. Now, when they come back in, he does toy with them a little bit. He does. I mean, we can't look at it really any other way. He does play with their emotions a little bit before he finally reveals himself. But he's forgiven them of the things that he's done. It's more like, I'm going to forgive you, but hey, you hit me in the arm, I forgive you, but you got to let me hit you back one time. Okay, so he weeps when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, Lord, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? And he makes that, it's a genuine question. All right? It's not a rhetorical question. I think he genuinely, am I in the place of God? Answer me. No, you're not in the place of God. Then I have no right to do the things. What anything that I would do to you would dwarf what you did to me. So if I were to harm you, it wouldn't even be like for like. It would be something awful. Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, and they certainly did. He speaks the truth here. But God meant it for good. Does that mean that God caused it to happen? Not necessarily. But God's going to take any circumstance, He can take anything, any circumstances, and He can work His will in it. Absolutely 100%. God meant it for good. God meant your evil to produce good things, to produce good results. To bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Now, He's not just talking about His family here, is He? He's talking about thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people who were kept alive because God gave Him this foresight to do the things that He did to make sure that people didn't starve to death in the middle of one of the worst famines in their history. All right? So God meant it to keep people alive. Now, look what He says, that many people should be kept alive. Who does that include? Includes us, right? It includes us. We're in those people. And I'm not talking about the physicality. I'm talking about the people of the world that were kept alive physically. That what happens? When Joseph did that, he allowed those tribes to survive, and those tribes survived. And now what do we have through those tribes? Especially the tribe of Judah.
Christ.
We have Christ, right? We have our salvation. And this was never in doubt. This was always going to happen. But God used Joseph, and that's what He's talking about. That's who we're talking about here. Thus He comforted them and spoke kindly to them. He says, do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones. Making sure they understood that, no, I'm not going to repay like for like. I'm going to take care of you. All right? So, I did put this up there, and it's not a big issue, but notice that the mention of love is absent. So no, I love you guys, and he says, no, I'm going to take care of you. I'm not going to do wrong to you in return for the wrong that you did to me. So, anyway, let's see. So Joseph lives to be 110 years old, and he lived long enough to see Ephraim's children of the third generation, so his great-grandchildren. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die. Now, there's a little bit of debate about whether this means his actual physical brothers, the other 11, or if this is merely his brethren, as in the offspring of his brothers. A little bit of debate. It's not that big of a deal. Whoever it is, this is his kinfolk. These are Hebrews, not Egyptians. All right. So he says to his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that He swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." So this is personification. He's not going to take. Zebulun is not going to leave Egypt to go into Canaan, but the tribe of Zebulun is going to go out and live in the land of Canaan. Okay. So he says that. He says they're going to bring you up out of. He's not talking about them physically. He's talking about the people that their progeny, the people that are going to come after them. He says, "Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear." I think this is the least they can do. "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." So Joseph died, being 110. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. All right. Anybody's got? Now's the chance.
You think Manasseh died? Notice on verse 23, it says, Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were brought up on Joseph's knees. I think it's interesting that they're not said the same way.
Yeah, there's a little bit of there's kind of an odd phrasing when it comes to the children of Manasseh and the children of Ephraim. Yeah, and truthfully, I couldn't find anything that explained that. It is kind of a weird thing, though. Why would they phrase that? He says Ephraim's children of the third generation, and the children also of the son of Manasseh, not his grandsons. But it does mention, it says they were counted as Joseph's own. And I'm wondering if, it's a strange thing, because I couldn't find anywhere where it talks about the idea of counted as Joseph's own. The only thing I could think of is that maybe the father, maybe Machir died, and Joseph essentially adopted those as his sons instead of having Machir alive. That Machir actually died, and he adopted them as maybe receiving an inheritance that would have gone to their father. It goes to them instead. That's the only thing I could find on that. It is kind of an odd phrasing, though. And I wish I could say anything more than that. Yes, ma'am.
I mean, so just a little thing, but I guess I was surprised that he was buried in Egypt. I thought maybe he'd be buried with everyone else, back.
I don't. Well, they do carry him up out of Egypt when the children of Israel leave. But he is. You're right. He is interred in Egypt, and probably because the brothers didn't have the standing to go before Pharaoh and say, "Hey, let us leave and take our brother's bones up." He occupied a very particular position, and probably, how Pharaoh wanted to make sure that the people saw Joseph as Egyptian rather than Hebrew. They did not. They wanted to perpetuate that and continue that on. So rather than him being taken up and buried with the Hebrews, then he was interred in Egypt, because he probably was in some sort of a royal tomb. I mean, he wasn't put in just any sepulcher anywhere. He was probably put in a very high place of high position. But he doesn't stay there. When they leave, they go and they get his bones out. Can you imagine what that was like? Because they didn't get his bones out until after that night of the Passover. So when everybody's mourning, they all go and they break into this Egyptian tomb, grab his bones, and put them on a wagon and head out of town with that. I mean.
But he was involved, so he weighed a pen.
Oh yeah, they're picking him up like this. Joseph Turkey.
Every time I preach that, I'm going to reference it.
I wish you would. I
really like verse 24 though. That's kind of like a home run statement for the ending.
Yeah.
God made a promise.
Yep.
He's going to keep it.
Yep.
And He's going to deliver you. Just trust it.
Yep.
And I've heard sermons on that saying that God's made a conditional promise to us saying heaven's coming. Just trust it. It's coming.
Wait. Yeah. Just wait and be faithful. Wait and be faithful. And when you think about this, that how long did the people continue to remember and continue to pass that to their? For a while everything was going well. So this idea that they would need to be taken out probably kind of vanished from their minds fairly quickly. It's like, well, why, hey, don't forget, God's going to come and take you out. Well, why would we want to go anywhere? It's great. And it wasn't until that Pharaoh came up that they say didn't know Joseph, didn't remember him. He was no longer counted as one of Egypt's greatest. and the people had outgrown the land, and they were outnumbering the Egyptians, that all of a sudden they fell into a less favored status. But for the longest time, everything was going great, so they probably were thinking, well, I don't really want to be carried out of Egypt. It was pretty good for us. We're growing, we're multiplying, everything is going great for us. So I wonder how long that promise lasted before they finally quit talking about it to their kids. And then when it came time to go, that they forgot that promise, and they're wondering, okay, who's this Moses guy? What is he doing here? You know, there's a great deal of confusion at this particular point, because he has to go and convince them that they need to be set free. You know, well, listen, if you just get rid of a little bit of the work, we'll be fine. He's like, no, I'm here to take you completely out. Yeah, and then they get into the wilderness. You know, we had meat in Egypt. You know, it's like a kid. You know, hey, here's this. Yeah, but you know, you could have had this. You think, what is wrong with you? But there we are. All right. Real quick question, and then we'll, because we're about there. Why didn't the family move back to Canaan after the famine ended or after Joseph died? This kind of goes into what we were just talking about. Why didn't they say, well, you know what, the famine was over, and the produce was growing, so why didn't they move back to Canaan? And this kind of goes into what I said a couple minutes ago. In Exodus chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, what does it say?
They had it made.
What's that?
They had it made in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. 6 and 7, it says, Joseph died and all of his brothers and all that generation. So the tribal patriarchs are gone. The tribes remain, but the patriarchs are gone. It says, but the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Basically, they inhabited the entire upper land of Goshen. It was theirs. They grew so greatly, the tribe grew so greatly that they filled up the land. Why would they want to go home? Everything was going great. The Egyptians left them to their own devices. They got to raise their herds and their flocks, and then they ate off the fat of the land. And you know, why would you go back home? They kind of lost track of that promise, right? I don't know. All right. Anything else?
Did you say that Joseph was like Jesus?
He was a type of Christ.
Type.
Yes,
Type.
a type of Christ.
Yeah.
You know, just there were some characteristics about him that are mirrored in Jesus. Yeah.
Wouldn't you say that this was kind of like a foreshadowing of what would happen to Israel as we read the Old Testament? You know, with his brothers being the tribes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they're cyclical. You know, coming back and forth. You know, that, and Joseph kind of reminding them, listen, God's going to be with you. You need to trust Him. You know, this is kind of like a foretelling of what would happen with them in their lives.
And we look at the idea of the tribes. I mean, what did they do? They got into the land of Canaan, and they became complacent. They became self-satisfied. They got happy and healthy, and they kind of lost track of the promises, lost track of the commands as well, what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So, all right, folks. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's been great. I'm leaving it with you.
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.